Welcome back to Psychedelic Therapy Frontiers, the podcast devoted to exploring the frontiers of psychedelic medicine and what it takes to cultivate a healthy mind, body, and spirit. I'm Dr. Steve Thayer, and today my co-host, Dr. Reid Robinson, and I finally get around to answering some of your questions. These questions came in via email and Instagram survey. We didn't get to all the questions, so I guess we'll have to do another Q&A episode again soon, if you folks liked it. So let us know if this is something you'd like to hear more of. In this episode, we tackle questions like, what are the pros and cons of legalizing psychedelic therapy? Is there a preferred psychotherapy modality to use with psychedelics? What's your biggest life advice? And a lot of other questions. So, I really hope you enjoy our answers, or at least find them useful. If so, don't be shy about leaving us a review. You can do that on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. If you're watching on YouTube, you can always like the video and leave a comment. That lets the machine elves running YouTube's algorithm know that our video is cool, and then it shows it to other people who might think it's cool. So, thanks for tuning in, and I hope you love our episode. Reid, how the heck are you?
Hey, Steve. We're like two offices away from each other right now in the same building, aren't we?
It only makes sense that even though I could probably throw something and hit you, that we meet online, because we are in that age where the internet runs our lives. But I'm grateful for it. Grateful for the miracle of Zoom meetings.
We're virtual guys in a virtual world.
Mm-hmm. Well, today's an exciting episode because it's different. This is something we've never done before, and we've threatened to do it many times and decided to go for it this time. So we are doing a little Q&A episode today.
Indeed. We got a handful of questions. I don't know, a good dozen or so hot off the press that we could make our way through, right?
Yeah, some of them we pulled from our email account. Some of you have been, over the year or so we've been doing this podcast, been gracious enough to send us questions and episode ideas. And then Reid pulled his enormous Instagram following the other day for some questions, and we got a few. So we are going to meander through these questions and do our best. And of course, each one of these questions could be an in-depth episode in and of themselves, and some of which we've actually covered a little bit before, but we know that we've been doing this podcast for a while now, and we might even have some listeners who haven't heard all of our episodes. Heaven forbid. So we don't mind covering familiar ground.
I would love to know some, just in terms of psychoanalyzing the internet and these curious questions, like how many people do go back and listen to old episodes when they subscribe to a new podcast? I know my personal experience, but the psychiatric, psychoanalytic, and data science nerd in me wants to know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do the data say? I know I can speak for me. If I find a podcast that I really like, then I'll go back into the library and just sort of scan through episode titles and see if there's something cool. There was a comedy podcast that I went back and was, because there were so many references, like some of these, especially these comedy podcasts will come up with these references to old episodes that are supposed to be really funny. And I can tell if I got the references, it would be really funny. So I would hunt back in time for those episodes so I could kind of get the lingo. But, and then there are the interview style podcasts, which we're both conversation and interview style, where I'll comb through the episode catalog and just check for interview guests that seem interesting.
Yeah, well, thanks for humoring my tangent, but we should probably get back to the
we love
question.
We love a good tangent. Yeah. So let's dive into these questions, Reid. How about I start? We'll just take turns reading them off here. What are the pros and cons of legalizing psychedelic therapy?
You know, legalizing, this is a good question because there's a very interesting distinction that we should make between legalizing and decriminalizing. Because in many states, cities, states, over the past few years, psychedelics have been decriminalized, psychedelics and some other drugs. a lot of the West Coast has led the way on that front. But just because something's decriminalized doesn't mean you can access it for therapeutic and healing purposes. Just means if found with it, you won't be thrown in jail.
Yeah, sometimes they'll give drug possession the lowest law enforcement priority. So it's not that it is legal for possession or distribution. It's just that if you, as you stated, if you just do get caught with said substances, you're not going to be in federal prison for 20 years.
So legalization has occurred in the state of Oregon, or is unfolding as we speak, with Measure 109 that was passed in Oregon to create a legal infrastructure for delivering therapeutic psilocybin in various clinics in the state of Oregon.
Right. Not without some opposition, though. I mean, I read that there are some counties, I think it's going to be approved. This might have changed since I read about it, but on a county by county basis. So some counties are like, nope, no psychedelic therapy happening in this county. So you might have to county hop once it actually happens.
And, what's interesting is even the main governing body, Professional Association of Psychiatrists, came out opposed to Measure 109 back when it was first proposed. And we at Novamind at the time, now we're, of course, part of Numinous, that's folded Novamind into it. Ooh, there's some free energy whizzing by, some sirens if you can hear it. And if that's a silly inside joke, it's a Ram Dass comment of he was giving a meditation lecture once in a big city, and there were some sirens in the background, and some might find him distracting, but he's like, "Thank you for the free energy."
I like that. It's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, it's a perspective shift. So we came out back then in support of it. But the debate stems from the fact that there is this drug development path traditionally followed through an FDA approval process, and psilocybin is in fact under a fast track designation and in clinical trials for depression and treatment-resistant depression. But Oregon, like many other states and locations, and like many of us wanted to expedite that process and didn't think it should wait that long and be accessible to only that indication it gets tested for. So they took matters into their own hands. And I guess we're talking about pros and cons of that.
Yeah, I think there are pros in that it gets something that has been used by human beings for thousands of years, past some what some people think are arbitrary and draconian barriers, so that it can get back to people to use in a healthy way and a responsible way to heal. So that could be a perceivable pro. That being said, psychedelics, psilocybin included, are for everybody. And the question was, what are the pros and cons of legalizing psychedelic therapy? And I guess wrapped in that question is legalizing psychedelics generally, right? That people... some people have the opinion that human beings should have a right to alter their consciousness in any way that they see fit, and that the government shouldn't be the one to tell them whether or not they can alter their consciousness with one drug versus another. Examples being that caffeine and alcohol are legal throughout the United States, cannabis legal in many states. Why those drugs and not others?
Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to, because as a clinical trialist, I can see how some might, without looking at the data around psychedelics, might say there is a process put in place by the FDA for a reason. Like phase psilocybin at the time of Measure 109 didn't even have phase 3 studies started yet. And phase 3 studies are part of this FDA approval process to protect people, because it involves studying hundreds or perhaps thousands of patients in clinics and monitored very, 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 very carefully around the safety of these things, and to avoid fake and fraudulent claims or like exaggerated claims of curative potential. So it's a public safety protection effort. The thing about psilocybin and other psychedelics is that they are known have been known to be extremely safe in quotes, medically, physiologically safe for decades. And so I can totally see why states want to take matters in their own hands, and I can get behind it on behalf of psilocybin, where if it were some unknown chemical entity with yet to be tested potential side effects, then I might have a different opinion.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And, Oregon isn't just legalizing psychedelic therapy and saying, all right, anybody who wants to go for it, go for it. There are still, regulatory measures in place to make sure that the people leading these psychedelic medicine sessions have some training and some qualifications.
Yeah, it's an important distinction to point out. When legalization efforts occur, it's political, right? It's societal, political, and it's not really an exercise in testing, evaluating, making conclusions on the evidence. Like you see in the medical and recreational cannabis programs, they're, sure, they have a list of potential indications, but it's not going through the same process, where the FDA drug development path is extremely expensive and time-consuming, and is a way of applying the scientific method to the question at hand in a rigorous manner. And unfortunately, psychedelics were overscheduled back in, say, the late 60s, early 70s, and now we're faced with this dilemma. So the pros, I see the pros of decriminalizing and legalizing as paving the way for more widespread access. But I think, what you were saying, Steve, I agree with, is that we still need to pay attention to the therapeutic use, the set and setting, and, careful usage of these powerful tools for healing and growth.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you mentioning it being a political process. It's frustrating to so many of us that you can have medicines that at the time were being studied for the treatment of really, really difficult disorders or conditions to treat. And that, somebody in the government can say, all right, these were all illegal, right? The scheduling process can be relatively quick, it seems like. But then the process to get those drugs rescheduled or to now prove, no, they're safe and they're effective is so slow. And sometimes in order to be rigorous, you use the word rigor, we need to be slow. But sometimes it's slow because of bureaucratic red tape and lack of funding. It's frustrating, but pros and cons, as we discussed in the question.
Yeah. Well, should we move on to the next, or anything else you want to say on that one?
No, let's move on.
Okay. Number 2. Is there a preferred psychotherapy modality to use with psychedelics?
Yes. My favorite one. Mm-hmm. Whatever it is, as long as it's my favorite, that's the preferred one. I think, one answer to this question, one short answer is we don't know. We don't know. Well, preference implies, some bias. Is there a better or best or most effective psychotherapy modality to use in conjunction with psychedelics? That's the question I don't think we know the answer to. It's an empirical question that we could test. But does it seem like, from the people doing clinical trials or those of us who work in psychedelic-assisted therapy, does it seem like some modalities play better with the psychedelic mind state than others? I think so. So we'll just render some opinions, given that there's the word preferences in the question. Mm-hmm. In my use of ketamine with my psychotherapy clients, and then I've done some clinical trial work, of course, with other medicines, it seems to be that therapies that allow for the work of what we've been calling the inner healing intelligence to take the lead are better than therapies that involve more rigorous structure from the top down, from the therapist to the client. So I'm not going to take you through my 10-session manualized protocol where we cover, these topics on session 1 and these topics on session 2 necessarily. Not to say that couldn't be helpful. It certainly could. But instead, we're going to see what emerges. We're going to use therapeutic approaches that focus on mindful awareness of one's inner experience. We might use more somatic and emotion-focused approaches to, again, give the steering wheel to this person's natural self-actualizing tendency and create a good environment for it to emerge, rather than what would be the word, like impose a structure on the healing process.
Yeah, that's a good point, because traditionally many psychotherapies do have a clear-cut method or theory of intervention, like CBT, psychodynamic psychotherapy. They have these active ingredients that are provided by the therapist to bring about mental change. And then we've got these person-centered therapies, emotion-focused therapy, IFS, sensory motor, that they recognize to a greater degree the role of the individual autonomy and the inner healer. But psychedelic assisted psychotherapy seems to have brought into the light the strong need to center that inner healer as the main active participant and ingredient in therapy. So yeah, I think the therapies need to honor and support that, with the disclaimer that this question depends on the indication. Like if you're working on a substance use disorder in particular, there might be a manualized motivational enhancement therapy approach that might work quite well. Or if you have binge eating disorder and the gold standard is CBT, it beats even the approved med like Vyvanse for it in terms of reducing binge episodes per week. Psychedelic medicine dosing sessions paired with the gold standard therapy might be the way to go. It's to be determined, still needs to be tested, but that's a little bit of food for thought.
Yeah, I like that food. I think we need to be thoughtful about the people who are at the helm of this modern psychedelic science and medicine renaissance. Also have just sort of their own modalities that they like. And so that happens to be the ones that are dominant in the clinical trials, like with MAPS, for example. Their manual for MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for PTSD is heavily influenced by acceptance and commitment therapy and internal family systems therapy, and this more trust the inner healer approach, this more hands-off approach. So things to consider. Also, we did an episode a while back on the essential qualities of a psychedelic therapist. And that's worth a listen in reference to this question, because there are some qualities that a therapist, coach, guide probably should develop that are independent, or maybe would be common in any therapeutic modality. Qualities like, gentleness, compassion, reflective listening, a deep abiding safety in your presence with the other person, being very, very accepting. So, these qualities, I think, regardless if you're doing a manualized CBT or DBT protocol versus, a more client-centered open approach, you should probably have and cultivate these qualities.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And besides all the kind of preamble about, like you said, Steve, it depends. Like you bring the therapy that you are the best at as a therapist, and that supports the client's inner healer and autonomy and healing journey in the best possible way. But there are some that are kind of very intriguing as pairing well with the psychedelic medicines, and some that even stemmed from this work, like transpersonal therapy, perhaps from the 60s and 70s, supporting, like built around this notion that there is something greater than our individual sense of selves that we can tap into and leverage on the healing journey. Or internal family systems, for example, seems to pair quite well with psychedelics as far as our early state of understanding goes, because psychedelics might give you an awareness of the parts. Or one other I'll mention is Hakomi therapy that I recently did some training in, and I'm a fan of because it creates this, it just mirrors the psychedelic experience quite well by building a relationship of trust with the individual, helping them see how they organize their experience, their behavior, their habits, their beliefs, and then helping them contact in this safe container their core feelings, beliefs, memories, and then work through them in a gentle approach. So I've been really, really keen on that. And I know some of the MAPS trainers like Marcella Odalora come from a Hakomi background.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are a few modalities that you see pop up among the people who have been doing this work the longest. And Hakomi is one of them, like you said. IFS is another one, like you said. Somatic experiencing, EMDR, a lot of these more somatic approaches, and emotion-focused therapy. But it runs the full spectrum, right? Lots of different approaches, I think, can leverage the power of psychedelics. I think we'll find, though, as we keep researching them in the lab, but also using them in the clinic, that psychedelic experiences themselves tend to lend, that they tend to play better, like we started the question by saying, tend to play better with certain approaches over others. And over time, we'll probably land on a few approaches that tend to be the best.
Yeah, the debate is in its infancy. The exploration is just beginning.
Yeah. Awesome. Let's move on to the next question. What should you do while on magic mushrooms? I like this question. It's like, well, bro, you need to hug a tree. You need to make sure you look at this mandala. Make sure you listen to East Forest. Like, plenty of fun opinions out there.
That would be fun to ask 100 people and collate those responses. But I almost want to flip the question around and say, what should you not do while on magic mushrooms? But I will say there's a book I stumbled upon and happened to own called Getting Higher, The Manual of Psychedelic Ceremony. The author's name is Julian Vayne, Vayne, and it's a fun read on what to do while tripping, basically, and it talks about how to trip at a museum, how to organize a ceremony with friends, games to play while on psychedelic medicines, and all of this with the disclaimer that that's a fun book, and we on this podcast happen to be medical professionals working to bring psychedelic medicines into clinic via above ground psychedelic medicine work and clinical research studies. And you heard some of our opinions on, legalization, decriminalization, but we need to give the disclaimer that we cannot condone illegal activities or recommend them. But I will gladly tell you what's on my bookshelf, and that was a fun book.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you made the disclaimer. And you'll often hear people in our positions, when we make disclaimers, also go on to give guidance for people who might be using psychedelics in an illicit context. And we do that because we feel like we have a responsibility as people who have a little bit of experience and knowledge to try to reduce harm. You'll hear the term harm reduction in our world a lot. So we're not shy about sharing what's on our bookshelf and giving people resources to help keep them safe in the event that they choose to alter their consciousness without necessarily, as Reid said, condoning or encouraging the use of illicit substances. So all caveats in place. Another book that I just got, I think I even mentioned this book in the last episode, is Rick Strassman's The Psychedelic Handbook, a practical guide to psilocybin, LSD, ketamine, MDMA, and DMT ayahuasca. And in there, he has an entire part, Practical Guidelines, Chapter 11, How to Trip. And this is a pretty accessible book. It's short and concise.
And colorful.
And very colorful. So for those of you, you're welcome, Dr. Strassman, for the free plug.
Shout out to Rick, the other Rick.
So many Ricks.
Well,
Yeah. What should you not do? So many things. So many things you should not do.
remember that psychedelics are non-specific amplifiers of subconscious processes.
Mhm.
And so, just know that the energy, both the internal and the external energies you bring into this experience, might get pumped up quite a bit. And so, yeah, there are some places that you can imagine would be much more intense. If you're tripping at Walmart, for example,
Yeah.
on Black Friday.
Don't, don't take it lightly, right? You should educate yourself on the types of experiences that the person might have. Certainly, you should be cautious about taking any substance that's handed to you. Because if it's a mushroom and it's a dried mushroom, you hope that the person who picked it and dried it knows their what is the study of mushrooms, their mycology or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, you need to be cautious just about the sourcing of the thing, and then Reid, you're referring to setting, right? If you're looking for spiritual healing, then there are certain types of settings to use mushrooms in versus others. Not that you can't have a Kundalini awakening in Walmart on Black Friday on 5 dried grams, but it's not the setting that I would choose.
Beware of unearned wisdom, they say.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk about that in another question. But, sometimes you feel worse before you feel better. And you want to go in very consciously, intentionally, and not put yourself in a situation where it's just too much to handle, or could even be counterproductive, if perhaps even traumatizing.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we should describe what typically happens, the setting in a psychedelic assisted psychotherapy session, what we do with ketamine, what's done in these psilocybin clinical trials. People usually have several therapy appointments before they have the medicine where they're working on setting their intentions. They're getting a clear sense of what they want to accomplish by engaging this medicine. What parts about them do they want to uncover? Do they want to explore? Do they want to heal? Do they want to address? And so they've got a lot of context going in. And then in the setting itself is, depending on which clinic or practice or retreat center you're working with, the container is safe. The container is non-distracting. It might have a few stimulating items to help you with manage your or explore your intention. But there's often eye shades to promote an inward journey. There's often music to assist you in the journey and create chapters in the experience. There's somebody there with you, completely focused on you, who's done their preparation to make sure that they can be there for you and with you, keeping you safe and guiding you if needed. And then afterward, there's integration, right? You're not just sort of given mushrooms and then said, good luck with your life. There's more support to help you integrate whatever insights you might have gained during the mushroom experience, but also navigating challenges that might persist long after the experience is over. So, the question, what should you do while on magic mushrooms, depends on the setting, and especially if the setting is recreational versus therapeutic.
And I like that. Thanks for throwing that in there, Steve. And it inspires me to add a real answer to this question. What should you do while on magic mushrooms is go inward. I think a common thing I've seen is people just get distracted by the outside world. And to quote one of our friends and mentors who's taught us a lot about working with ketamine, for example, Phil Wolfson. I remember while working on facilitating some CAP experiences for a study team on a project we were doing, Phil Wolfson said, the good stuff is inside. Put on eye shades and go inward. Doesn't mean you have to be there the whole time, but when in doubt, explore your inner worlds. That's one of the things these tools are so good for.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's one of the things that really separates casual or recreational or even ceremonial use of psychedelics from the psychotherapeutic use of psychedelics, in my opinion. But I know people who are self-described psychonauts who will use psilocybin weekly, but they've never done it with eye shades. They've never done it with, headphones on. They've never done it for a deep internal inside exploration. It's always been hiking in the woods, which can be awesome. Not knocking that at all. I'm just saying it's a different experience.
Yeah, because the state of mind that is brought on by a psychedelic, some call it an altered state of consciousness. I like to look at it as a therapeutic state of altered consciousness, where there's a reason why not everyone who takes MDMA and goes to a rave heals their trauma, right?
Right.
It's a very different intention and vector of that tool. Like, these tools in and of themselves can be quite, like, I don't know, agnostic to outcome or indifferent, but they can be, in the right container and context, powerful catalysts and facilitating agents for healing and growth.
Right. And every once in a while, you'll get that person who takes MDMA and goes to a rave, and all this repressed trauma emerges, right? They don't necessarily have the good time they were expecting. So yeah, non-specific amplifiers, as you referred to before, and the setting and intention matter.
Yeah. Well, you ready for the next one? I think it's related.
Yeah.
What resources can you share for psychedelic integration? And then the person who asked the question said, I will have trips that leave me confused or with the trauma that surfaced.
Right. Yeah. Well, perfect segue from what we were talking about a second ago. Maybe we should define this term integration that we use so much and that I referred to earlier. Reid, like, when you think of integration, when people in our field say integration is the most important thing, what are we talking about? What is integration?
Okay, so many definitions. I'll give you my favorite of the moment. So integration is the process of digesting that change and those insights that came up during that psychedelic experience, and manifesting those insights and your intentions to their fullest expression.
I like that. I like the metaphor of digestion, because when I think about eating something and metabolizing it, digesting it, I'm basically taking the parts that are important to sustain this organism and making them part of me, right? We are what we eat, so to speak. And then the parts that aren't useful, I excrete those. I let go of them. Not going to hold on to those. So I love the metabolizing or the digestion metaphor for integration.
Hey, cool. I like how you took it to excretion as well.
Oh yeah. It can't be a podcast without me talking about poop.
I have another analogy to throw in the mix about integration, a jungle one, because anyone who's backpacked around the world or has done extensive traveling knows that when you return home, it can be a shock to the system. You go on an epic vacation, you come back, you're like, what is life? And it can take months to adjust to being back home after like a world trek. You've had all these incredible experiences and it changed you, but life, the people, the stuff at home marches on to the same beat, it feels like. And they've just been living out their regular lives while you've been on this epic voyage. So it does take time to adjust to the new you and your new life. And there's a book that I love, my favorite book on this topic. It's not even geared towards psychedelic experiences, but it's by Jack Kornfield, After Ecstasy, The Laundry. I mean, mind you, he's had plenty of psychedelic experiences, and I think he had that in mind when he wrote it. And the title perhaps has a double entendre, as the French would say. But it is like with psychedelic experience, you've gone on a consciousness world tour, experienced eternity in a night. You come back to the office on Monday and are expected to make small talk. That can be jarring. And so you need to leave the time and space to integrate and weave those things, those insights, those changes into the default world, into the life where you still got to chop wood, carry water, and you got to do that in an intentional way, and it takes time.
Right. So, in that time and space that you've created to do integration in an intentional way, what might a person do? Right? What are the tasks? What are some examples we could come up with for folks that are a little more brass tacks? The things that come to my mind are certainly it depends on a person's own mental hygiene routines, or maybe the lack thereof, or spiritual hygiene routines. But for me, I feel like meditation, specifically mindfulness type meditation, is a really, really good integration tool, both for preparing for psychedelic therapy experiences, but also integrating, digesting, metabolizing, integrating those psychedelic therapy experiences. Because, like mindfulness meditation, so many different types of meditation, but the type of meditation where you are learning and watching the nature of your own mind, where you're trying to retreat behind the manifestation of your parts, the ways that you think, and sort of meeting them at the threshold of consciousness. And you stop giving them the steering wheel to your life and invite them to sit in the back of the bus. I'm just going to use as many metaphors as I possibly can. While you or your higher self drives the bus. I feel like meditation is a good way of doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. And the bus analogy, because that's one thing I was thinking is like, don't forget to be an observer of your experience. Because it's easy to get caught up in how even turbulent, like the question asked about, how turbulent the landing can be from a psychedelic journey. So, I'll add a few things besides give yourself time and space, spend some time in nature, allow yourself to learn how you've changed, like through meditation and stillness and solitude. And pay attention to your intuition, because I've found that it can be a lot easier to tune into after like psychedelic therapy or ceremonial work. Same with dreams, and keeping a journal, talking to people you trust, start new practices, throw out the old maladaptive ones, get help if you need it.
Yeah, those are all great. So people will often in that more direct or clearer connection to their intuition, people will often feel like they want to take better care of themselves. They might want to cut some people out of their lives that haven't been super supportive or have been a little toxic, or they might want to eat healthier foods. They might want to move their body more, rest more. So pay attention to those things, because like you said, if you sort of jump right back into the stream or the raging river of your day-to-day life, it might wash away some of those intuitive insights.
Yeah. And maybe I'll add two more reflection questions that I personally like a lot when integrating. Is one, how might I get in my own way? Just anticipating and looking at it so you can be prepared. And then on the flip side, what is one thing I can do to support my integration this day? Or what am I going to do this week? Say it out loud, share it with someone, write it down. And because little steps in that direction can make kind of leaps and bounds of progress over time.
Good advice. We do have an episode or two on integration in the catalog. So if when I'm doing the show notes, I feel inspired, I'll link to it. If not, you can always scroll through the catalog, folks. Anything else on integration, Reid, or are you ready to move to the next question?
I think I'm ready to forge ahead.
All right. Can you talk about blue methylene, if I'm saying that right? I think I've heard it said methylene blue in that order, and psychedelics. What's that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm curious.
What are you up to?
Ask her, what are you up to? Because so methylene blue, it's a curious substance. It's been around a little while. I don't know, 100 years or more, but it's being evaluated in some studies for its neuroprotective effects, even though it sounds like something called methylene blue might be toxic. It's actually has a pretty, up to say 2 milligrams per kilogram of body weight is quite safe. And I would guess that the person asking the question is interested in its MAOI properties. and the possible potentiation of a psilocybin experience, similar to the MAOI that's found in ayahuasca, and how some people will combine MAOIs from plants or other sources with psilocybin, another tryptamine like DMT, to potentiate it or boost their experience.
Mm. Yeah, makes sense.
So what can we say about it? Well, this has not been explored, even though there are accounts. Not been explored scientifically, even though it has been explored by psychonauts of Reddit and Airwood and other places. But I guess a little primer is MAO, monoamine oxidase, are these enzymes that are responsible for the degradation of psilocybin and DMT. And so DMT just happens to get chewed up a lot faster, and orally is not going to do much, but psilocybin does. It is, I guess, fairly well established that if you inhibit MAO through an MAOI, for example, you can get this entourage effect that some call it, meaning a boosting of the psychedelic experience. And so that's, I think, what some people are doing when combining psilocybin with things like Syrian rue seeds, like P. harmala, or other plants, or other things like methylene blue. That being said, I cannot recommend it. I have zero personal experience with it. I've seen that it has some interesting studies for cognition, memory, nootropic, neuroprotective effects, but I haven't messed with it myself.
Yeah. Well, this is the first time I'd heard about it, so I don't have any prior knowledge to base my answers on. So I think that'll suffice.
One thing I'll add just for fun is that it is blue and it can stain things. Oops. It can stain stuff, your clothes. It can make your tongue blue, but that'll pass half an hour. You might have a blue mouth. It might make your pee blue. I've even heard of some people getting the whites of their eyes a little blue. And it was used back in the olden days to ensure medicine compliance. They could see if someone took their medicine by using it as an indicator dye.
Oh, interesting.
Just some fun methylene blue facts.
That's wild. Cool. Let's move on to the next one.
Okay. Does ketamine help with bipolar depression?
Well, it can. Bipolar depression, typically there are different types, but typically people have these different phases where they're either very, very depressed, they're in extreme depressed moods, and or they are a little too high in what we call manic or hypomanic mood states. And those can get as serious as psychotic mood states, where people are losing touch with reality during their manic phases. And the depression can get so bad that people have a hard time getting out of bed, or they have suicidal thoughts, things like that. So I'd like to hear you riff on this too, Reid, but at least the way I approach people who've been diagnosed with bipolar disorder is, if their mania, if present, is well controlled, they haven't had a manic episode in a long time, but they're struggling with depression, then ketamine-assisted psychotherapy can be a great tool to help treat their depression. All the while being very cautious that it's technically possible that when we alter consciousness with ketamine, that it could occasion a manic state. That's never happened with any of my clients, but it's something to be cautious about.
Yeah, no, I agree. And so I would give the same answer, that it can be helpful. Ketamine does have a growing body of evidence to support its use in bipolar depression, but also a pretty well-established need for caution in someone with bipolar disorder because of the risk of worsening or unearthing a manic episode. So in bipolar disorder, which is a pretty significant condition, like I think 1% of the population at least. And most of the way it shows up is through depressive episodes. And those can be pretty debilitating. And ketamine has been studied for bipolar depression. It's even been studied in adolescents with a specific subtype or form of bipolar that isn't an official diagnosis, but it's called the fear of harm phenotype. Like these features of where kids and adolescents have this very strong resistance to normal accepted treatments. And so these researchers did a little study several years ago using intranasal ketamine that was quite positive and reduced not only fear of harm, but some aggressive behaviors, even reduced some manic symptoms, like in these kids that might have had kind of mixed episodes. Mood improved, anxiety reduced. So that's one study I've appreciated and looked to for guidance when working with adolescents, which is something we'll do very cautiously with ketamine. Even though ketamine is used routinely as an anesthetic in all ages.
Yeah. So safe, relatively safe medicine.
By the way, go ahead.
No,
I have a side note. I was just wondering if you've seen a movie, Steve, called 13 Lives.
No.
I believe so. I was at my parents' house last night, and they told me, you need to watch this. It's about the lives saved from the cave in Thailand.
Oh, I heard about this. Yeah.
Yeah. And the use of ketamine.
Didn't they give the kids ketamine?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Without telling them they were getting it, because it was needed to get them to reduce their fear of harm, essentially, so they could extract them from the cave.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, they got some governmental approval, I think, but there wasn't even the ability in this, with the clock ticking and kids stuck in a cave, that if they hadn't gotten them out when they did, they may not have survived. But they had to use ketamine to do it in their best judgment.
So many indications, right? You can you can trank kids to get them out of a cave, or you can use it to see God and reveal repressed trauma.
Sometimes both. I think I may have told this story once on one of our early episodes, but when my brother Jeremy's oldest son broke his leg, he went into the ER and got ketamine. There's some more free energy. Can you hear it whizzing by? I wonder how it'll show up on the podcast. We can always insert sirens if needed. But he went to the ER and received ketamine for when they were setting the leg fracture. And he had this experience of, sure, it reduced his fear and potential aggression in fighting someone from setting your painful leg fracture, but also had this non-ordinary state of consciousness where he was like, Mom, are you real? What is this place? It was, they had a video of it that was pretty funny.
Yeah, my oldest son just got his wisdom teeth out, and I think ketamine was in the cocktail that they gave him, and he was very hilarious, having trouble connecting with the immediate present. And I wasn't there. My wife recorded him, but at one point, I guess they told him that he had been given ketamine, and he goes, "Ketamine? I gotta tell Dad. Dad's gonna be so excited. I got ketamine." That was a fun moment. Cool. Well, I'm mindful of our time. We might actually not get through all of these, which would be awesome, because then we could have a round 2 of our Q&A session. But let's see how many others we can hit here.
Why don't you pick one more and I'll pick one more? How's that?
Ooh. Well, we definitely have to do the last one.
Yeah.
We'll save that for the end.
So then your choice on what we tackle on our way to that one.
Okay. Well, how about this? Can you fully heal your mind through psychedelic work versus staying on antidepressants?
I'm not fully healed. Are you, Steve?
Oh, I came into this world just healed, and I've never been anything but. No, I'm definitely not fully healed. I think it's an interesting question to sort of pick apart. can you fully heal your mind at all? And it sort of implies that our minds are wounded, right? And I think it's hard to escape childhood, for example, without some psychic wounds, some psychic
Yeah.
scar tissue, if you will. This sounds like this person is talking about being on antidepressants, as a lot of people who are on antidepressants do, is sort of just to help keep them functioning. Antidepressants can be really, really helpful for people to help keep them functioning, but they often don't help people address the wounds directly. And psychedelics, in our experience, maybe have a greater potential to do that, psychedelic assisted therapy, at least. So, can one fully heal their mind? Well, I think you might be able to integrate an alienated internal part of yourself, which can be very healing. You might be able to address a trauma trigger such that it is no longer triggering, but it doesn't rewrite the past.
Yeah, and antidepressants, traditional ones, like SSRIs, I think we may have talked about on a past episode, are a really helpful intervention for some people on the path to healing, but aren't designed for full healing. Like many of our meds in psychiatry, they're meant to as a stepping stone along that path. And psychedelics are so interesting to us and exciting in general to the mental health world and the general population. One reason being because of their ability to kind of move toward and through this healing work instead of kind of keeping it at bay so it's manageable for now. And I know that's an overgeneralization. So maybe a better way to answer this would be, can I just read a poem?
Of course.
This one's called You Gotta Feel It to Heal It, Why We Have to Stop Numbing the Pain by Dina Strata. So I've spent much of my life resisting my true feelings. Anger made me feel wrong. Sadness made me feel weak. Needy made me feel girly. Love made me feel scared. I became an expert at hiding when I was feeling any of the above. Some people numb their feelings with alcohol, drugs, shopping, or sex. I numb with control, being in control, exerting control, maintaining iron will control over my every emotion. Don't think I have anyone fooled. Besides, this only works for so long before the emotions leak out and erupt like a dormant volcano. One of the most famous quotes of every 12-step program is, you got to feel it to heal it. As someone who absolutely hates feeling anything that makes me vulnerable, this is the best advice I've ever received, because I've felt no greater pain and sadness than I have the past 2 years of my life. Yet it's been the catalyst for my greatest transformation. Every crazy, unhealthy, not like us at all thing we do in life has a catalyst. Something that triggers the event that lands us in the place we never thought we'd ever be. It could be the death of a loved one, the memory of some childhood trauma, the meeting of another soul who holds a mirror up to us and forces us to see what we don't want. And we're here because we can't face the real pain that lies beneath it. So we look for ways to escape it. But the only way out is into the feelings, into the pain, into the hurt, into the loneliness. There is no other way. Believe me, I've tried. I've tried every other way around it. And I'm here to tell you there is none. You got to feel it all to heal it, pass through it, and get to the other side.
Mm. Yeah. In that way, psychedelic experiences are very different than your standard SSRI antidepressant experience, in that they will often escort you right into that refiner's fire of your feelings. And I love the poem because it implies that is the way, right? As we've said many times on the podcast before, those triggers are friends. And if we follow them, they can guide us toward what we need to do, where we're holding, where we're bracing, where we're resisting in order to get past.
Yeah. And I guess to further explain my initial comment of my healing work isn't done, it's just because I have this view that our healing is never done. Like you said, no one escapes childhood unscathed, but no one walks through day-to-day life hurt. You open your heart, it'll get hurt. There will be feelings to feel, losses to grieve, and changes to work through, things to process. And all of life is a healing journey, a ceremony. All of life is needs integration. So I love the approach of doing it as we go.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Here comes the big question here at the end, our final one for this episode. I guess it's your turn to ask.
Okay. This question came in from my daughter, Emily, who just went off to college. What is your biggest life advice?
I think it's apropos that it comes from Emily. At this transition time in her life, she's asking Dad for some life advice. So I'm going to take a stab at it, though.
Yeah, go for it.
Biggest life advice is hard because there's so much advice to give, and I've received so much helpful advice from the teachers, mentors, and friends in my life. But I think the thing that came to my mind is get to know your mind. Get to know the nature of the mind. Spend time with yourself in quiet reflection, whether that's in nature, meditation, psychedelic therapy, whatever, journaling, but get to know yourself and cut yourself some slack. So maybe it's a 2-part thing. That the better we understand the way our mind, our soul, our body, our emotions, the stories we tell ourselves, consciousness, the better we understand this vessel that we're sailing through life in, the better we can navigate the journey. And because none of us know exactly what we're doing, I think a healthy dose of compassion is in order. So get to know your mind and cut yourself some slack.
Beautiful. So I think I would turn to one of my great teachers of the past few years and draw a few nuggets of wisdom woven into a little answer from Ram Dass, who said famously, "Be here now, and we're all just walking each other home." So another thing he said is, treat everyone you meet like God in drag. Because in most of our human relationships, we spend much of our time reassuring one another that our costumes of identity are on straight. And then when you take off your mask, it's easier for others to do it too. And then this idea that all of life is a curriculum, like everything on your plate is the stuff for your enlightenment. And then it's like breathtaking when you see like the beauty of that design. Even suffering is part of our training, you know? And then, like you said, Steve, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. And like Ram Dass said, I want my life to be a statement of love and compassion. And where it isn't, that's where the work is.
I love that. Well, we should leave our audience with that good advice.
Okay. Good to chat with you.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Reid. Thank you, dear listener, for listening. It means a lot to me. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you're using to listen or watch. Also, if you're feeling generous today, please leave us a glowing review on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you like to listen. Thanks again. The content of this podcast does not constitute medical advice or mental health treatment. Consult with a medical or mental health professional if you believe you are in need of mental health treatment.